Good afternoon. For those of you who have headsets, make sure that you have it on channel 1. This conversation is actually going to be in Spanish, but we have translations available, and I see most of you have headsets. Just make sure they're on channel 1.
I have with me Dr. Calderón-Rosado, who is the Executive Director of Inquilinos Boricuas en Acción, a community organization in Boston founded in 1968 for the development of people with low and moderate incomes and to provide services to aid families and to preserve artistic and cultural manifestations of the Latino culture. In 2009, Ms. Calderón-Rosado was elected for the Bar Foundation Fellowship as one of the 12 most talented leaders in the Boston area, female leaders in the Boston area. This talk is happening in the kitchen because the most important conversations in our community happen in the kitchen. We always talk about the most important things for our community in our kitchen, and it happens to be a very casual talk. And the purpose of this talk is to be able to talk about what affects poverty and what the real way that we can achieve progress here in the city. If it is going to work fine, it would be if everybody participates. Please ask questions if you have to. I have 7 questions in front of me, but these are not all the questions. The audience always have questions, so I ask that any time that you have questions, please do them. And to Jesus and to Vanessa, when there are questions, please talk to the person who asked the question, but also look at the camera. And for everybody who is watching us live, you can follow the conversation in Twitter with the hashtag RisingClass. Now we can begin our conversation. For both of you, first question. The first question is, everybody faces moments in life in our way to progress. Can you tell us of some moments that were very important for you facing towards progress? Well, there are many moments in my life that are important, that I understand have been critical in defining who I am and the way I think. But one moment that I remembered was one of the first, happened in 1969. At the time I was 5. So now you know my age. But at the time, in 1969, well, I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. In those years, my uncle, my sister's youngest brother, was elected to serve at the Vietnam War. In 1969, I still remember very well the day we went to the airport in San Juan to say goodbye to my uncle when he was going to Vietnam. Since I was only 5, I couldn't understand why he had to go. Where was Vietnam? Why was there a war with Vietnam? And why my uncle had to go there? I remember, and the worst I remember from that day is to see my aunts, my mother, but especially my grandmother. I'm so sad to see his son departing, not knowing if he was going to make it back. Fortunately, he came back 2 years later, but it was a very traumatic experience for me. At that time, at 5 years of age, facing the concept of war, I started to understand what were the concepts of social justice, the concepts of peace, concepts of politics, power, and I believe that since that moment in my life, I started to ask questions in my mind of the imbalance of power that exists. I think then that was one of the first moments in my life that I can define as very important. Thank you very much, Vanessa. And Jesus, how about you, Jesus? For me, it was also as a child, in my childhood, when I was almost 10 years of age. My mother had three of us. I'm the youngest of three, one after the other. We are 14 and 17 months apart. One day, my mother wanted to, decided to get a better life. She had a sister here in the United States, in Amherst. She thought the best way for her to progress is to move all of us to the United States from Puerto Rico. So, with just a suitcase with us in her bag, 80 bucks in the pocket, my mother said, we're going. One of the things I remember is that first we arrived in New Jersey. My father's aunt was there and met us. She helped us. She took care of us for a few days and then took us to my aunt after, and it took 4 or 5 hours. Once we arrived to my aunt, where she had other three young men, we moved with them. Soon after, people started walking by in the apartment and saying, "What do you need? How we can help? If your mother is planning to go back to university, then we can help with that." So, using a network that already exists, people knew that to be able to move forward, you will need that assistance, that help, so that you can push forward. Many times you don't even think about it, but people have some simple gestures, um, even just a hand coming to you saying, "Hey, everything okay? Can I help you? Is there a group for children if they want to do activities after school?" So little by little, I know that it was very important for my mother to feel that she had a community where she could have some control towards achieving her goals. So that took some time because she didn't have a relationship with many people as it happened in Puerto Rico, in the Puerto Rican community. But little by little, she developed new friendships and moved forward. That for me was the beginning. And it wasn't until when I was in the university, when I used the same contacts that my mother used to be able to enter the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, that we started working for a non-profit organization. If you don't know, this community is a very large community of Puerto Ricans of low income with different generations, one come after the other, with poverty that has existed for several years. I don't know if the resources exist, but the opportunities don't. Standing there, I understood that if we had if we had not received support, then my life would have been very different. The communities open to us, then you use a code 001002. Using that code opened me many doors that helped me more than two other Puerto Ricans that were there without access to that community. So that made me think, hey, what are we talking about here? When we talk about justice, when we talk about opportunities, when we talk here what is said in Spanglish, it's known as the American dream. Does it exist for everybody or just for a few who have access to use resources, available resources? So that was it for me. In this talk, I realized that for the three of us, it was when we were very young that we realized that we wanted to work in this social field. And it was seeing the difference among different communities, and that there was something that opened our eyes to the different standards in the communities. I always also wanted to ask, because you mentioned different people that influence you in your life, is there one or two people that were particularly influential for you? Yeah, we're interchanging here. Yes, see that when I arrived to Boston, I didn't know anybody. It's like I felt that I lived what my mother had to live too. So I started working at the Boston Children's Services, a non-profit organization in Boston. That's how I started making connections. I became good friends of Alex Saldaverde, who is the Latino Society director in Boston. We developed a friendship. She was one of the people who, little by little, told me, hey, there is a community here in Jamaica playing. They do incredible things. Get in touch with them. There is a job here in this small community that is called school committee. I'm not sure if you're interested. And now, 14 years later, I feel that I owe everything to her. She opened me a door that she allowed me to do more connections. She saw something that I didn't see, not just in me, but in the connections that I was looking for here to become part of me. Because to be accepted and to see your identity grow with a group of people like this really changed my life completely. It's the same throughout my life. Many people have influenced my career, my trajectory. I can only begin with this first person that was my mother. She was my North Pole, my star, who helped me decide, helped me make the best decisions, and also the best way. She was a person very compromised, very committed to social justice, and she always instilled that desire in me as well. Number one, she was number one, but there are other many people in Boston. There is a woman that has been very much recognized in the Latino community in Boston, Miss Jovita Fernandez. When I arrived to IBA 9 years ago, I was an executive director, but but shortly after I arrived to IBA, they had they went through a difficult transition, and I was the interim director. I became the interim director. People didn't know who I was, and everything was based about leadership and your connections, and I didn't have those credentials. Jovita took the task of sitting down with me, helped me vent in many cases, but also to tell me, what about this? Have you thought of this? With any type of attachments. She just took the time to sit with me, to call me, to check how I was doing, to just pat me, to just hug me when I was crying, to tell me, hey girl, you can do it. Continue, you can do it, and I can do it. You have it in your head now, you just have to find a way. So I really see her as the person who has been a big influence for me, especially in this phase of my life when I took the when I took the role of leading this organization at such important time. So thank you, Jovita. In our campaign, trying to understand what it means, progress, we are making videos, and many people have needed someone who believed in them. That has been very important for them. And also what you said today. I'm going to switch topics a little bit. Since both of you are leaders who work in the community that we also work with, that we want to make our communities improve, what is your opinion? What do you think is going to contribute to end poverty? What is going to help us end poverty? It's a very simple question. It's very simple. I imagine you never thought about it. Well, well, where do we start? Where do we begin? Begin wherever you want. It's a very complex question, obviously. There are many factors involved that act to end poverty. I think one thing that is key, that has a very big political charge, but I think is one of the key steps to begin to end taxes is to help end poverty is taxes. taxes are very unbalanced. The tax system does not develop the opportunities that are really needed for people with low resources, like our communities, based on area codes. For people who don't have many resources, actually, people who have more resources, they pay lower percentage of their resources towards taxes, where other parts do not get benefit from it. So I think that is something critical. So this is an election year, so we're going to be hearing about taxes until we get tired of it. And unfortunately, I don't see any political party really focusing on or having the guts to focus on this. Aside from taxes, and also to allow Jesus to answer, but aside from taxes, I also think that the poverty issue in this country, and specifically in Boston, has to do with ethnic and racial groups. I think that there are problems of prejudice and racism exist, even an institutional racism still continue to perpetuate poverty, even if people don't want to think about it. Even people with good intentions, sometimes they do a work, they make decisions that don't necessarily take into perspective what other communities, um, what will be best for other communities. I'll leave it there for Jesus. One of the things, quickly, that I think I, th- I, th- I agree with the part about taxes, that where the government is interacting with low-income people. Many times I work with a woman with 3 children. She's receiving government aid, and if she makes a step forward, then the government then removes that aid. The government says, here, there's the money to match whatever you're doing. And I think many times that is a problem. The system as it exists today does not exist to motivate those people to move forward, but rather to make people stay, because the leap that they have to make from earning 25, 26, 27,000 dollars each year to be able to sustain themselves is is 10 or 15,000 dollars more, and we cannot do that because we cannot give them that perspective. That's a point in which we definitely agree. In my work here in Boston, one of the things that are very difficult is that we want to help very much. We think we have, I think we think we learn many lessons. One of the lessons that I have learned is to start practicing not to create solutions and rather trust that if people have the resources and the possibilities, that they can do things by themselves. And again, here we have 3 stories where in each one there has been one person or 2 people or a community who pushes us and supports us moving forward. And I don't really see our money doing that investment in those communities. And I think we want to start saying, before we start creating many programs, and before saying, I know better than you what you need to pull ahead, is rather ask, hey, what do you need to do? What do you need in order to do that? I think we have to start having those conversations, and that's a shift in power. And I think that's important. Many families talk about the embarrassment of having to go and get coupons, like this woman, for instance. I know her really well. When she's in the supermarket and all her friends are around nearby, you know, and the children don't want the friends to see the mother paying with coupons because that gives you a very bad stigma in this country. But it is a necessity because otherwise you cannot eat. And now, if you are in that situation, then how can you get out of it? We have to ask, what do you need to get out of it? How we can do it? We have we have to have the conversation instead of saying, here's I'm give you what you need and do what you need. I'll try to speak in Spanish. I want to know, what do you think? How a regular person with work, with family and everything, how can I help change this way of thinking? But people in poverty without ability, how I in my regular life can I change that? Making tiny steps. Your turn. It's a very difficult question that here in Boston Rising we're thinking about. And before you answer, I also tell the audience that you can participate. And even if it is in English, you can ask in English if you have a question. Because we understand English and we will reply in Spanish. But Ali's question is, I think it is also important to think that it's important not to think that you're regular and the other people are not, because a lot of differences come from that way of thinking. I know that's not what you intended to do, but yeah, yeah. Well, it is a difficult conversation because I was attending a meeting yesterday, a talk in which we did a study of needs of different communities, a neighborhood in Boston and two other communities not in Boston. In the list that we prepared, the list of needs, it was public safety, there was substance abuse, there was obesity. That was the list. And at the end of the list, it said poverty or lack of money. And someone who was there, said, what interesting that poverty is at the very end and not first or towards the top of the list. And I said, well, what happens is that people with low income don't see themselves as being in poverty. They don't think, hey, I am in poverty, poor of me. They think, hey, I don't have money for breakfast for my children tomorrow. I don't have clothing for my children in winter. I don't have transportation to go to work. I'm not sure how I will do. I'm gonna arrive late. They were gonna let me go. I don't have money for rent this month, etc. Those things, all those thoughts are indicators, are poverty indicators, except that people who are experiencing it don't think in those terms. I am living in poverty. They think I don't have the resources. So I think it is important for us, people that work with people of low income resources, and to understand that, because sometimes we have this perspective that I have the solution, I have the answers, and we are a resource. And part of rising, a very nice example that Jesus mentioned. We are a connection. We are a resource to help them connect. That perhaps if we can say, hey, we can help see that they need this resource first. These are the resources that are available. Which is the one you think you need first? But let them figure it out first. Because sometimes, as Jesus was saying, sometimes we think that we are the ones with the solution. I couldn't have said it better. What I would add is that part Cindy was saying that many times It's like we forget that we are not all the same. And I'm just saying, well, it happens with me too. In some way, we begin to think that the solution is for a certain class in this country, and that solution would be different to a different class, when in reality, the solutions already exist. It's just a matter of sharing, and people work shoulder to shoulder and see how I do my things, how I spend my day, how I make my connections, and this is how we were able to benefit from people that who said, "Hey, I know that Jesus doesn't know anything, everything, but if I invite him to this meeting to see how I dress, to buy a few professional outfits, I think they can begin to see what the steps are needed to arrive there, to do the same." So some people, I think that happened to me too. Some people called me and said, hey, come. I think you could participate. They didn't say, hey, you have to, but they gave me the option. And they showed me with their example. And now I'm not such a stupid person that I couldn't catch on. That's just to add a little more to what Vanessa said. She's completely right. Now that you're talking about something personal, we say here the word rising. In Spanish, it would be, yeah, rising or elevating. Personally, are you still growing? Yes, yes. I would never claim I know everything or that I have answers for every question that is there. On the contrary, I almost don't have answers for anything. But in reality, I understand from my perspective, life is a constant trip where you learn every day stories that inspire you, that make you think in different ways, happen all the time. Sometimes they touch us without us even realizing. I can tell you that in my job, in the community of Villa Victoria, and with the people who participate at EVA programs, I've learned a lot from them, and they have helped me many things, including enormous humility lessons, enormous lessons of perseverance, enormous lessons of achievement. I confess I was born in a middle income family, middle class family. I had many privileges belonging to the middle class that many people that I work with don't have. And for me, it has been a real honor to work with them and to learn from them and their lessons. If I rise, I hope I rise every day, that in the process of rising, that I also elevate my immediate family, my children, and to be an example for them. And I rise hoping to use that rising, that growing, and that knowledge to rise people who are with me on a daily basis. Thank you. Same with me. I pull ahead. I have recently become a father, and it teaches you a lot. It shows you that you really know little about life. It reminds you every day that you don't know much and that control doesn't really exist. Many times you you imagine or think about a step in your life, you imagine a road to follow, and it's never going to be the way you imagined it. But that desire to keep moving forward, not just improve to be a person, a better human being, being a better individual here in the Boston community and with the people that you have relationship here with, but also with your family, and you want to start sharing those lessons and to see how they can also learn without being hit so often. And quickly, I can share that this last weekend I was sharing with my cousins, with which we shared an apartment, so many of us together in the past, and we can see that so many things have changed for us in all this time, and that makes you think and wonder what will the next step be. We have a question here from the audience. My question is, how would you advise the people that you work with? You talk about rising. I'm not sure if only personally, but when you rise, I feel afraid of losing my connections with the community. If I go to college, when I go to college, I feel that I'm in a different world altogether. How, when you rise, you still feel that connection to your community? This is a very important question. That rising doesn't mean leaving your community behind. So, what advice do you give people who want to rise but also maintain the connections with the community? Well, I don't have a unique answer, something that will clarify everything. I can only share my own experience. And to me, it has been difficult because at some point it had meant ending relationships that were not giving me support. And not just that, but sometimes perhaps they were even pushing me away from my way, from the way that I had to follow. And then I had to say, you know what, at this time I cannot deviate from my way. And so, with all honesty, I have to say I cannot continue with this relationship or with this friendship or whatever it was. Even if they are friends, family, anything. But it happened. It happened. And I think that for us, being Latinos, using the Spanish language, especially when you go to university, when all of a sudden you understand that you are not, you, you don't belong to this culture. I know, I know you shared, you study where I studied in Amherst, and now you wonder what are going to be my connections to my culture, my identity for the future. And really, this is something with which I struggle every day. For instance, I speak in Spanish to my son every day, and this is for me one step that means to me that I'm not going to lose my connection. I think this is one of the little things that keep you sane. I completely agree with you. It's a real challenge for people like us who have double identity, or three or four, because you have identity as mother, as daughter, as neighbor. We have multiple personalities. I think it is a challenge. I don't want to. I don't want to add more to that because what Jesus said was extremely eloquent. But for us who struggle every day, I'm gonna say it in English. Just embrace it. Embrace. Embrace what you are, because that's what you are. When I moved here 20 years ago to Boston from Puerto Rico, I came to study. I came with the idea to stay. And 20 years later, this is my home. So today, when I go to Puerto Rico to visit my family, and I go to that airplane in Logan, I'm thinking, I'm going home. I'm going happy. And then when I take the airplane in San Juan, I say again, I'm going home. I'm so happy. So I'm privileged. I have two homes, I have two bases, and it is not easy sometimes to confront, to face, and realign these two bases. Sometimes I'm at home and I can leave my hair down, and then, and sometimes I have to say, hey, now how do I conduct myself now? How do I behave? But that's the dance that you have to dance, but do it because we have two opportunities, double opportunities to grow, double two bases. So embrace it, go for it, and love it. I have a question. You both have a lot of experience, personal or through the people that you work with, and you understand the situation in Boston and the poverty. And I ask you, why do you think there is so much poverty in Boston? Why do you think it exists right now? Another small one. There have been centuries of history. There are political processes and capital powers that establish systems, and within those systems, some social institutions that enable poverty to prevail. So I don't even know where to start, honestly. It's a very difficult question. Jesus, help me. Well, I don't have an answer. To me, the hardest part is that you sit down, perhaps you're watching a TV program or listening to a song or participating of a meeting, and then it hits you, oh, that's the problem. If you could only do, but there are so many things. I, bel- I believe that going back to the part of solutions, what makes it so difficult is that there are so many resources that people spend so many days. People spend every day, not just in Boston, but in the whole country, because they think that they can just grab one of those pieces and say, "Oh, if it was just this part, then we're gonna take out a little." If I were multimillionaire and could write a check to help, I would be I would continue to give to organizations like IPA. You know, in everyone's pockets in Boston, they can find people where they are. We we tell them how we work together. We would talk about what is needed. Let's do something with music, with art. Let's bring communities to work together. And then you just begin to forget about those problems, and you just think, now that I have a bit of inspiration, what can I do? What can we do? And really, for me, those are the moments that in my life have always lead to change. The other things, university, school, education, work, relationships, has been unbelievable. I have gotten so much, but being in a concert, sitting in the grass, when you're relaxed, you start thinking, how can I get inspired now? And using the connection that you mentioned in the beginning of this conversation. How do we connect? Boston is a small city, really, compared to other cities in the nation, but it is very territorial. So we cannot get together the best way because there are so many resources, and but there are so many good people with so much education and instruction. Sometimes you think, wow, how can we can do this? That must be one of the challenges. But also relating this to the answer you had in the beginning, how do we help people to formulate their own solutions to their problems. I mentioned Jovita. Jovita never told me this is the first step, this is the second step, but she helped me process the steps in my head. Sometimes she told me, hey, better not to start there. Based on my experience, when you go and speak to the mayor, don't do that. So she would tell me based on the things she knew and the people she knew, and she would give me her opinion, but she allowed me to process it myself and determine what was the best course of action to achieve a solution. And I think that's one way to help solve the poverty issue. But talk we talked also a little while ago about the biggest factors. You made me think with something that Jesus said just now that many times in our communities, especially the Latino community, when people earn $1, then the government takes $1. Many people say that the people wants to remain in poverty, but sometimes what is best, what seems to be the best, is not really the best for people. That is true. I can testify with a true case. In IVA, Via Victoria, aside from the social programs we offer, we also have almost 500 living units, accessible units. Sometimes a number of people who live in Villa Victoria, where the majority of these units are, they also work for IVA. So we provide them with employment at the agency. And sometimes when we can raise salaries even in a very modest way. Many people many people think, oh, now my rent is going up. And sometimes when the rent goes up too much, they have to move away from the community that they love. And, and that's a reality. Many of the people who live here in this table don't want to move away from where we live because we like the neighborhood, the birds song, singing, the sirens, whatever. I had a question here, but when we answer the question, we should try to continue moving in the same direction that we are now. More than a question, I want to make a comment. It is very interesting, this talk, especially when Vanessa dared to mention the political causes, macro causes of the situation that sometimes we don't even dare to talk about. The logic of with capital is to grow. For people who have a little capital, it grows and grows. So they have to exploit more the people who are below. There comes a time when there is no room to grow more. And then measurements have to be taken, measurements that affect communities a lot so that they can continue to grow and become the big corporations that they are. Based on that, I started to observe that. And immediately movements like Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Boston, Occupy New York appear. And I started thinking the following. With this big nation, there is with a deficit of trillions of dollars every year. And poverty continues to grow. The middle class continues to disappear. And this is the class who spends and produces. We need to take political measurements, big ones in the country. There is a lack of education, as our friend here said, a different mentality. I dared, since I'm kind of daring, I dared to write a letter to Congress and to the White House, and here it is. I guess it was an economist who answered, the ones that not very well educated, and perhaps just the signature is just a stamp. The signature is from Barack Obama, but it's a stamp signature. They justify the direction of the economy, the way we're going, and that we will again be a big nation. I don't believe this. I think we need political measurements. And that's why I appreciate what you're doing. I left my small business alone to came here and listen. I think we have to change people's mentality and have a different mentality, different education towards development. Our young women, we have an example. Our young women from the black community, from the Latino community, from minorities who are finished, they are becoming pregnant, taking care of children, living in a housemate apartment without the husband. The husband comes as a visitor because if he's there and works, then they will need to pay more in rent. So what we see statistically, there are many families that are broken when in reality the man is sleeping there every night in this low income unit. When this woman has two children with a husband that is not declared but who sleeps there every night, and when this woman analyzes her life, if she were to work, and then she would lose housing and food stamps and cash, then she would lose a lot more than when she would earn in a middle income salary. That's why it is the system itself that is making people, is causing people to perpetuate themselves in poverty. Boston Rising, Inquilinos por Educación, and other organizations that try to get people out of poverty, I believe they have to work in developing a mentality of development, of growth, of education. Otherwise, we're just going to be ending up doing the same thing the government is doing, just giving some small gifts. Do we have reaction to this community about changing the mentality in our community? Yes, of course. Specifically, the work Jesus does in his organization has a lot to do with changing that mentality. And I would say that basically the encounter of whoever these people are changing this position, we have to do what she said, and we have we put ourselves in that position that said this is you are the one who will direct this. The message has to be, you have to tell me, how I can help you. But until then, we don't really have anything. I'm thinking about that, giving this power to them, the power of what, then we know that they already know what they have to do because, again, examples exist around. That's the difference we need to inspire others. You also do it the same way, right? Yes, we agree. Sometimes the system, what it does is to perpetuate poverty. Thank you. We have one last question before we finish. We have to finish. And along with this question, you also want to leave us with some messages. We can also do that.
It's interesting to listen to the dialogue. I grew up in a family where my father was a Southern black man. He moved north to give an advantage for his family. And a lot of that sounds similar to what you're going through. And then I wonder from time to time, different dialogue, I guess you guys are both Puerto Rican. Is the dialogue different about going Dominican or some other?
We have a community.
But also South America.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I think that's a great question, and I think the only major difference that we would be talking about is differences in immigration laws. But I think as minorities, we all have a very similar struggle, and we find more similarities than differences. There may be some differences here and there.
Would that be true if you were a Cuban in Florida? I mean, it seems from what I've read, there's a difference there.
Yo pienso, I think, no hablo inglés o español.
Answer will be in Spanish. I think that there are definitely differences. That all of us have differences. There are many aspects, cultural. There are many of the differences that exist between these different subgroups within the Latino community have to do with immigration to the United States. It could be the moment in which we enter the country where immigration happened, the reasons, political, economical, social, and the place where they live, the region of the country where they live, southwest, southeast, northeast. So based on that, the answer, in my opinion, to your question is that the Cuban community in Miami will have different needs than the Puerto Rican community in New York or Villa Victoria. So yes, there are differences, no doubt of it. But many times the difference is based on the reasons to immigrate to the United States. Sometimes there are reasons are economical, sometimes they are political, sometimes there is a combination, but that has to do a lot with it, and also with their country of origin. I would agree. I would say the same. I would say exactly the same thing. Even the Puerto Rican community in Holyoke, New York, Boston, the needs are going to be different in each place. I think that for us, the blessing or whatever we call it is that we can arrive is that we arrive without having social security. But we can arrive here with the social security where other people from other countries first have to obtain that, or actually they begin to work and do their things hoping to achieve that. And as they say here, to become legal. But then you see a community like the Colombian community in East Boston where the problem of papers is there for probably about half the population, and they do something every day. Not just it's not just that the only thing that I have learned from them. They cannot count, and since they cannot count with government solutions, they create the solutions by themselves, and that's what we have to learn from them. And learn from examples the way I did. And at the Afro-American community here in Boston, I see there is already a story of 150 to 100 years, and they can also teach us so that we don't have to bump so many times and hit ourselves so many times. So I think that the good thing is that there is this diversity. And I think, for instance, that the Puerto Rican community in general, wherever they are in this country, as Puerto Rican, I feel sad accepting that we are second-class citizens. Because, for instance, my father, he was Puerto Rican, and his year in November, he cannot vote, being even though he is American citizen since birth. I, her daughter, his daughter, living in Boston, I can vote. If he were to decide to move to Boston, he could vote eventually. So those are factors that get very deep into the mind and the heart of the people. You start to feel when you look at the political participation, for instance, in Puerto Rico, it is very high. But once they move to the United States, it it becomes very low. There is always a very active group that keep that political activity, but the majority decide not to become active because then that dichotomy starts to work. Well, we are not here to talk about Puerto Ricans, but to me as Puerto Rican, you have touched on a very important point that I think is a very important factor that affects the progress of the Puerto Rican community in the United States, wherever it is, New York, Boston, Villa Victoria, wherever. I want to help me thank Jesus and Vanessa for a wonderful conversation. I really felt that I was in the kitchen on a Sunday, talking with the family. No, there's no food here, but we're gonna fix that now. I want you to help me thank them. And I want you to invite them to come back. The last talking in summer, it's going to be in June. So Nadia and Tito Jackson will come to have our last conversation of the summer. And we will resume these conversations in September. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.